Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Butler. I'm the Director of Programs here at the Delaplane. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's Art Matters Artist Talk with the members of the Clustered Spires Quilt Guild and solo exhibition artist Margaret Dowell. The Clustered Spires Quilt Guild is a local group of quilters that gathers both new and experienced quilters monthly here at the Delaplane to share their work, learn new techniques, make community service projects, and hear quilt experts from around the country and the world. And I also want to add, they give very generously of their time to our instruction programs. So we really appreciate, I want to shout that out while I'm up here. They have wonderful Helen Smith workshops that they've done with us, as well as classes and workshops. So make sure to keep your eye out for those. Margaret Dowell, her personal history includes both laboring beside her family in the tobacco fields of southern Maryland, including planting, cutting, and stripping, and high academia. An art educator by career, her teaching resume includes public schools, colleges, and universities. A visual artist by fate, she began in her youth drawing in the dirt, then as a young woman creating installations, shown mainly in Washington, D.C. universities and art centers. Painting social commentary works in oils followed. These works often address the likes of gender, violence, mental health, and addiction. Today, she lives on her ancestral farm, which dates back to the 1700s, painting images inspired by farm life, both past and present. So please join me in welcoming all of the artists, but the first Quilt Guild speaker who's coming up.
This truly is something I have not done in a million years. So, quilting I've done. I've lived in Frederick here downtown for 8 years, and I've been a member of the Clustered Spires Quilt Guild for 8 years because before I even moved here, I met one of our members who invited me to show up, and I did. As you look around this room, all of these quilts, our theme was inspired by. And when you look around this room, you can see the inspiration. I mean, it makes you do things that you didn't think you could do. We all have different skills. We all have different outlooks. We all do different things with our hands. But when you look around at the breadth of work in this room, when it was hanging, I helped put it a little bit up on Monday, I was just overwhelmed by the stuff. It was really neat. So, what I want to talk today about is one of my quilts, which is hanging back there on the corner. It's called Australian Wildflowers. And for me, this was inspired by my travels down under. When I went to the gardens in Sydney, beautiful Queen's Gardens, and just absolutely gorgeous flowers that you could take pictures of and you could just fall in love with. And the textures were different than anything we see here because it's a different part of the world, growing in a different climate. And when I saw this quilt and all of those different things, I knew I had to do it. It took a bit to get the pattern, but I got it. So that's the quilt. And the first thing that drew me to it was the borders and the Celtic corners and around, and the sashing around the blocks. And I had a hard time figuring out what colorways did I want to do it with. So I have a good friend here in the Guild, and I don't think she's here this afternoon, but we went shopping. And she said, "Peggy, you need this one." Like, really? Peggy, this is it. Really? So that's where I decided to go with it. And that border around there is something she picked out, and it was never it just was never here. I never saw that as being something. And that was Helen. She's got a beautiful eye for color and is just really good at it. So I also belong to another group that meets down in Baltimore. And one year we had a challenge was make your bucket list quilt. Make some quilt that's just something you always wanted to do. Well, there you go. That was it. And what happens when you work with a group like that, with that kind of challenges, you have to keep up with it. You can't let it ride. you know, if you meet once a month, you got to show up. So every month I would work really hard on a block and bring it in. So the hardest part for me was to start. So this is the block that I started with. And it is red flowering gum and flannel flowers. That red flower up at the top is all embroidered with lots of little knots and all kinds. And that in itself probably took me a week to do. But I said, if I can do that, then I can do anything. Well, what I didn't realize after I did that those flowers are all around the borders and in one of the other blocks. So it was a lot to figure it out. The other thing I do, and I was telling some of the ladies the other day, I would say, okay, I'm going to make 3 blocks, and it's fun. They're all different and they're fun. And then I have to do a border, because I can't save 4 borders for the end, because otherwise it'd still be sitting under the table. This pattern is by an Australian woman named Val Moore, and she's had some beautiful work out there. I think she must be older these days, because I don't see much of her work anymore. She's published a few books with patterns and a lot of her embroidery stuff. She published this as a machine applique quilt, but I don't do that very well. So I do everything by hand. When you make a block, when I make a block, when I start to think about what I want to do, the pattern, and I brought one to show you. This is the pattern for the block that's, I think it's down in the bottom, in the middle. So it's almost like paint by numbers. All of these are marked. They're actually all numbered. And they're numbered in kind of the order you should put them down so that all of the overlapping pieces are. And so it really is paint by number. Figure out what you want to do. So what I will do when I first start working on a piece is this pattern, I have to trace templates for everything. And there are different ways to hand applique and to turn edges under, but I do what's called prepared edge. So I put a template down, and I turn all the edges under before, and I make all the pieces before I start sewing them to the background. And the trick is to find really cool pieces of fabric to make the flowers come alive and the leaves look realistic, or at least like you want them to look. So, so if I have a template for a leaf, I'll take a piece of fabric, and I have to laugh because all the quilters in this room know that you have a stash of fabrics about this big, or bigger. My stash is about this big, and every piece I own has 1 million holes in it. Because what I do is, all right, this is a leaf, and maybe I want to see a vein in that leaf, and I want differentiations of color. So I'll take, this was the template I cut out for the leaf, and I'll put a window on it. And I'll say, yep, that's where I want my leaf. And that's where I make the leaf, and that's why I end up with holes in everything. And for this piece, for this berry, I had just an oval, and I used this piece, which has a whole bunch of different colors in it. I'm a batik girl. Batik for me is really easy to applique because it doesn't have frayed edges, so I get nice clean edges. But I can make a berry that looked that color, or I could make a berry that had differentiations. And that's what I do as I go, as I build this, I'll build this whole thing up with all the pieces to make it work. Now this This one it's the middle block on the top row there, has lots of different colors. It has a lot of different embroidery. But one of the things that I have done over the years with my quilts, every time I start a new quilt, at least one of the fabrics from my old quilt, from my previous quilt, is in the new one.
That's great.
So I can usually pinpoint one. This one is a little different in that just before I started making this quilt, we had a member of our group who was really suffering from dementia, and her friends were helping her liquidate her stash. And somebody looked at this piece of fabric and said, "Peggy, you need that." And I looked at her and I was like, "It's kind of all glittery," and I'm not glittery. What do you mean? Well, but it has so many different colors in it. I can do the golds, the browns, purples, whatever. So this quilt, every block except the borders, and maybe Stewart's P in the center, because I couldn't figure out how to do, there wasn't the red to make it work. But every block has a little piece of this for Mary Stewart. And on the back side of this is a label for it that I made, and I identified all the flowers, because you couldn't ask me what they were. If you said, "What flower is this?" I'd just look at you and say, "Oh, well." I flip the corner over and it tells you. And the border around that is this fabric. And not everybody knows that it's there. Not everybody could find it. Sometimes I have to look really hard to figure out where I put it, but there is a little bit of everything in that one. And that's what's so cool about Clustered Spires group, is just the inspiration that you draw from everywhere and the connections you make to everything. That's it.
Peggy, I'm going to give you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's
I
good.
realized I didn't get all of it.
You don't want to lose that. My name is Olga Schrichta, and I've been a guild member, I think, since 2000. And like Peggy said, the inspiration in our group is just amazing. We have traditional piecers, we have art quilters, and everything in between. And we have people who are willing to experiment, and that's what I love. I think that's what I like to do best. So when I volunteered to be a speaker for this, I said to Joan, what do you want me to talk about? And she said, why don't you talk about your process, how you made your quilt. This is my challenge quilt for this year, and it's called A Few of My Favorite Things. And our challenge really struck a chord with me this year. It was, what's old is new. And in this challenge, you could not buy anything new for your challenge piece. You had to either previously own it or you bought it at a thrift store, but you had to already own it. And I love that because I'm not a traditional piecer, I'm an art quilter. So in addition to a lot of fabrics, I have a lot of craft materials that I was just dying to use. So the challenge gave me that opportunity. But then I started thinking, okay, what's my theme going to be so I could make good use of these things? And I decided to use a Christmas theme. So I started to write down my favorite things. Years ago, a friend of mine made a quilt with a snow globe in it. So that was number one. I knew I had to have a snow globe. Then I needed to have a whimsical gnome in it. I had to have a beautifully decorated tree, a lot of kitty cats, poinsettias, antique lace. And this quilt gave me the opportunity to use a lot of different techniques as well. I love to do wool felting, so I got to use that on the gnome's hat. I like to do collage work that I did on the tree. And then I do both hand-guided quilting and digital quilting. And then for the last part, embellishing. I don't think any quilt is done until it's embellished. So I got to have a lot of fun with this quilt. Where did I start? I started with a large piece of newsprint, and I basically sketched out my quilt. The first piece that I did was the snow globe, and I wanted it to stand out from the fabric. There are a lot of different interfaces on the market, so I used this one called Peltex that really gives texture, and I knew that would be enough to make it stand out on the table once I had attached it. And then I moved on to working on the gnome's hat. And I love doing machine felting. I can pass this sample around. And basically the way I did that was I started with a piece of wool felt, and then I took freezer paper, which I cut out the stripe that I wanted in the gnome's hat so I could outline it. And then I took wisps of merino wool, laid it down, and I have a quilting machine, shows here on the right, where 12 needles mesh the fiber into it. And that's how I got all the red stripes. I can pass that around. All the red stripes on the gnome's hat. After that, I had to decide on what he was going to wear. And I had this old piece of cotton flannel that had a really heavy fusible on the back. I mean, we're talking like plastic. It was so old. But I thought, okay, I can use that. So I knew how I was going to dress him. From there, I went on to his beard, which was made out of fake fur, his nose, which is made out of goat suede. He has green felt for his cuffs. And then I was really pleased that I found printed fabric that looked like it was knitted for his mittens. So I thought that was perfect. And then, of course, he needed cute little boots. So for that, I used cork that I had in my stash. After that, I decided that his hat needed some work. So I took it to my domestic sewing machine and I quilted little pebbles on his hat. I wanted it to look as if snow was falling down and had settled on his hat. And I also auditioned the little snowman pin and decided that was going to be a plus. That had to go in. From there, I moved on to the Christmas tree, and this is where I got to play with doing collage work. When I do collage, I don't use any fusibles behind the fabric. I just cut the pieces out, and I use little dots of Elmer's glue to stick them to one another. I don't want them to adhere to the paper because eventually I've got to move that to fabric. So I'm just working and layering and building up some texture. Once I got a handle on that and thought, okay, the tree's going to be okay, I had to deal with the kitty cat fabric that a neighbor had given me years ago, but I could not bear to cut up. Well, I finally had a reason to cut it up. I don't have a cat right now, but the one I last had was part Siamese, so I had to use the 11 Siamese sleeping underneath the Christmas tree. And then there were the 10 toms of peeping by the gifts, and I thought, oh, they'll be perfect underneath the little table. So I was pleased. I knew where I was going to use the kitty cats, and I went back to working on the tree. And this is the way it looked before I lifted it and I moved it over onto background fabric. I had to audition the fabric, and so I had to think about how did I want this quilt to look. And I wanted it to be a warm, cozy room that you would just want to spend time in. So I found fabric in my stash that had the rosy background with hues of green. But the best part was it had little teeny tiny snowflakes in it. So I thought, this will be perfect. And it was. So I shifted everything over onto the fabric and started to work on the fabric. You'll see that I'm missing a table. I had a lot of white space at the top. But already I decided that I needed a few more kitty cats in there. So I have some mischievously up in the tree because you know if you have a cat, it's going to end up in your Christmas tree. They'd be playing with the ornaments. So I worked on positioning those. And then I started quilting them down. Now, the quilting, if you look at it closely, it almost looks like trapunto. It really has dimension to it. And that's because of the way I layer fabrics in my art quilts. I start out with using a piece of what's called decor bond, and then I have wool batting behind it. And lastly, I have 80-20, 80% cotton, 20% poly behind that. And then when it's quilted, you get this wonderful texture, but it's rigid too, and that's what I like. I like my art quilts to look more like a canvas and not like a piece of fabric that's blowing in the wind. Can you pass that around? So when I quilted the kitty cats, they started to come to life. And I also started to quilt the tree to anchor that down. For the white space at the top, I used some of my favorite antique French lace. And then independently, I made the little Let It Snow placard. I made that separately. It looks like it's embroidered, but it's not. It's outline quilted, and then Fabrico markers were used to color it in to give it the look of embroidery, but it was so much easier than doing an embroidery. So I like to find shortcuts if they work. From there, I also found, if you look, I found the perfect wood fabric for the table. I was just delighted. I wanted a warm color of wood, and I just found this little teeny tiny scrap, and it was perfect for the table. So I knew I was ready to then quilt the background. For this, I used a digital pattern called First Snowfall. And I thought that was so appropriate because for me, the first snowfall of the year is magical. Now, we're not going to count the one we had a few days ago because that was messy and it didn't stick. But I love the first snowfall, and I loved this pattern. It's got the swirling snow, it's got little teeny tiny snowflakes, and just the name alone, I thought it was perfect. After that, I started to audition more things in the Christmas tree. And one thing that I had held on to were samples of the product that's called, or used to be called, Texture Magic. It's been rebranded, and I don't remember the newest name. But what's magical about this product is it just looks like a normal piece of polyester lining that you'd have in a suit jacket. Then I have wool batting and my top fabric. On this side, I've just stitched it, and it just looks normal. But when you take it to your steam iron and steam it, it shrinks up all around your stitching, and you get this beautiful texture. Now, to me, this is the closest thing to bubble wrap that you'll ever get in fabric. And I had saved all of these scraps, so I had these beautiful baubles to add to the tree. And I also fussy cut. I thought the tree needed some pine cones, so we put pine cones in it. And I was really pleased with the way it was progressing. At this point, I decided to work on the binding. I'd had this fabric for years, never knew what to use it for, but I thought it would be perfect for this quilt. But I knew a narrow binding wasn't going to do it justice. So I opted to make a 2-inch wide binding, which ends up, you cut your fabric about 9 inches wide to get that 2-inch look. You'll see that I covered the gnome's face when I was working on it. His beard is pretty fragile, and anytime you're working on something like that, it's a good idea to cover it so it doesn't show the wear and tear when you're working on other parts of your quilt. I still had too much white space at the top of my quilt, so I decided to add a garland of chenille trim. And I auditioned Jingle Bells. They were okay, but we still needed something else. It needed more color at the top. So for that, I fussy cut poinsettias, fused it onto red felt, and then added the Jingle Bells, and I thought that completed it. It was good. So we were almost done. And it was now time to finish the snow globe. Remember, I constructed it at the beginning and then attached it to the quilt, but I did not add the vinyl, the glass, until the final step because it too is pretty fragile. I stitched all the way around but left a teeny tiny opening, and believe me, trying to use a little paper funnel to get those little teeny tiny beads in there, it wasn't real easy. But it was a success. And if you look closely, you'll see that there are teeny tiny little half pearls in the center of all the snowflakes, as well as in the snow globe. It was done except for one thing that bothered me, and that was on my gnome, I had had to piece the fabric for his body, and I didn't like that you could see that seam, so I had to conceal it. So I added 3 hearts to his tummy, and the one on the left says Christmas love, and of course you can't see it, but I know it's a special little touch that's there, so if anybody picks up his beard, they'll find it. And that's the story of how I made. These are a few of my favorite things.
Olga,
Yes,
is your wall here?
yes, it's on the back wall.
It's on the other side of this wall?
Yes, yes.
Look at it.
Thank you.
Well, that's really hard to go after, I have to say. So I'm a completely different style of quilter. My name is Elle Irby. I've been quilting since about 2001. Although technically I made my first quilt when I was about 11 for a child that I babysat, and they still have it, which is kind of fun. But I really got into it in the early 2000s. My mom and I took a class together in a town halfway between where we lived in Georgia, and that was our 10 weeks of getting to spend time together, and I caught the bug, and I have had it ever since. So this is my quilt right over there, so you can see it both places. And so I consider myself more of a modern quilter. So it's very much not embellished. It's trying to use what you've got and make very functional pieces. So it's odd for me to actually make a wall hanging. I like to make quilts that are used on beds or by babies generally. So this one came about because I was making a quilt like that for a friend in my neighborhood who's had a hard time. So I cut out all these clamshells from 10-inch squares, and if you can imagine that shape on a 10-inch square, there's quite a bit of waste, and most people would throw those extra pieces out, but I am not most people. So I took all the little pieces from the top corners and cut them up, or not cut them up, cut them to size, and then started playing with the scraps and making little tiny half square triangles with them. I think they finished at about 2.5 inches once they were sewn together. And one of the other things I like to do is make everything as difficult as it can possibly be. So I didn't have a pattern for this. I had the pieces, the sizes that they were, and I wanted to figure out how to fit it together. And so they didn't come together with the way I wanted. So I used a technique called partial seams, and one of my DC Modern Quilt Guild friends helps me at our retreat sit and figure out how to make it, find the point to partially seam these seams to make it so that the ribbon, as I call it, the outline, lays flat. And I had a pretty big cheer when it actually worked the way I intended it to. This is a picture of basting the quilt. So Olga talked a little bit about using a long arm. She uses domestic and long arm machines in her quilting. And a long arm, for those who don't know, is a really large machine where the head of the sewing machine is what you move around. So the quilt is stationary, and you move the head of the machine to make the design. What I do is, using a domestic machine, is if this is my quilt, the machine stays in one place, and everything I'm doing is based on moving the quilt itself around with my hands. So it's completely hand-guided, and there's 2 different things you can do. You can use a walking foot, which makes it go for straight lines, or you can use a free motion foot, which means you're literally determining the stitch length by how quickly you move your hands. And so first what I did, this is the back of the quilt, and you can't see it great, but I started by using my walking foot to stabilize the quilt with these stars. And then I came back and did what I consider sort of my signature move, which is free motion quilting with a lot of details and being very fussy. So the free motion quilting on this small piece that's about 32 inches took me about 8 hours. So just for the free motion part. So it's fussy, and I'm a little bit out of practice. I had been doing it a lot, but we actually just moved to Frederick this year. And so during that moving process, I had to stop quilting because I had to move and help my mother-in-law also move to town. And then we've had medical things, and so this is sort of my get back into it. And it was harder than I remembered, but I'm really happy with how it came out. And so that's sort of from the side, so you can see the texture better. And there it was before all the other quilts were hung around it, the final thing. So that's my quilts. Thanks.
Hello, thank you for coming. I'm Margaret Dowell. My show is in that room. And I'm going to be sharing 3 works of art in just a few minutes. But first, and all 3 have a Frederick connection, and that's why I picked those 3. But first, I'm going to share a lot of gratitude. So bear with me, because there are a lot of people that I need to thank for having this show in place. We are inside a major art center. Approximately 50 years ago, a fellow educator, Meredith Springer, some of you will know him, had the idea for an art center, and an idea that he would not let go. I'm grateful to him and to the Randall and Delaplane families who stepped up to donate this former mill property for the community. The Delaplane Art Center opened in 1993. Soon after, I am very grateful to have served on the board of directors, working alongside Clement Gardner, Dr. Blanche Bourne-Tyree, John Katsu, and Frank Duval. All have passed, but I will never forget their impact nor their kindness. I am grateful for my family and friends who stick by me no matter what. Many of people in this room came from far away: Ohio, Vermont, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, California, and of course, Calvert County. I am grateful to my late mentors, Bill Caldwell and Marie Larson, and to the man I call my current mentor, Seth Bowman. Seth, you have to stand, wave, something, okay, so people know who you are. For several years, he has been the only person I allow to see works in progress and give feedback. Well, one more person, my bestie, Tara, wave, stand, wave, something. Say, no, and Molly. Molly has seen 2, these 2 right there. Okay. Seth flew in from Los Angeles this week to help me spot and hang the exhibitions. Friends Ronnie Nehemias and Joe Israelson, I know Ronnie's here, wave your hand. Okay, were also important to the unwrapping and installing of the show. And Tara let me wear her shoes today. I'm also grateful to Charles Crum. Charles, where are you? Raise your hand. Okay, way in the back. The first director of the center, who told me to select a larger gallery here for my work. Oh, and we have to thank him literally for putting out fires during his tenure, or we would not be here today. I am grateful to Von Willie. Where's Von Willie? She's in the back there somewhere. Where is she? She's in another room. Okay, anyway, Von, for taking care of the farm chores that would impede my painting time, for packing and driving my paintings here, for taking care of my animals while I'm away, and for her continued sage advice. If you can find her, yeah, that's what I'm grateful for. Okay, I'm grateful to Lauren LaRocca. Is she here? Not yet? I know she's coming at some point. Who wrote an incredible article about this show for the Frederick News Post. Great article. I am also thankful for the assistance of the amazing Delaplane staff. And a poet who may or may not be here yet, but you may see during your time here a poem posted by the Tea Time piece. Washington, D.C.'s automatic infamous poet, Brash, has responded in her words to Tea Time. I believe that the magic truly happens when the artist's background meets the viewer's background. She did this for me. So at some point you'll see a poem up there, not my words, her words, but really cements the creative process, how one thing can inspire another. And grateful to Joni Jenkins and Martha Ho for hosting an after party at 124 South Carroll Street, right up the block for anyone who wants to continue art talk after the show. Okay, so now that's my gratitude, and I really wanted to share that with you. And now my paintings, and I'm going to share just 3 paintings, like I said, with the Frederick connection. This painting was actually painted in Frederick. This is the oldest piece in the show. This piece is over 20 years old. It's a painting of my father's hands. My father was the last tobacco farmer at the Dowell farm, and he also grew a lot of vegetables and all kinds of things. So, wait a minute. I left out something, but I'll go on to this, and then wait a minute. What did I do? I left out my models. I want to point to my models. I have some models here today. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me hit them. The wolf, okay? The Tea Time wolf. He's here, okay? Raise your hand. Skip King. Yay! He's behind the mask. Okay, and JW is here. Where's JW? Oh, he's over here. Come up here. Come up here. Come up here. And my great nephew, JW. JW's here. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Anyway, I wanted to share those 2 models. This model was my dad, and the Frederick connection to this piece is that it was painted in Woodsboro. It was painted on Dr. Thomas Tarpley's farm. Dr. Tarpley, raise your hand over here. Dr. Tarpley rented a farmhouse to me for years at a very low price so that I could work part-time a lot for the Frederick County school system and do my art. And artists need that kind of support in order to keep going, and Dr. Tarpley, thank you very much, he did that for me for years and years and years.
Nice to be with somebody famous.
Well, thank you, sweetie. You were so wonderful to me. Anyway, the dirt in this piece actually came from my dad's farm. I put it in boxes and I transported it to my studio, and I had it sitting there, and I was going to paint it. And then I'm like, okay, how do you paint dirt and compost and make it look really interesting? So I went on to the farm, and Dr. Tarpley's wife, Mrs. Tarpley, had planted a white rose bush, and I took the white roses and I threw them in the dirt, and then it made it more visually interesting. So when you see this piece out there, know that that was painted here in Frederick and inspired by the white rose bush at the Woodsboro farm.
Patricia would love it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So anyway, this is my favorite piece. This will always be my favorite piece because it's my dad. Okay, this piece was inspired by Michael Kent's book, Mulata, a Calvert County history of the blacks in Calvert County. And one day, Michael Kent stopped by the farm, and he said, I have a book for you. And he said, in this book, it talks about a young man who worked on this farm, who went on to become a very prominent person in Baltimore. And the deal was, he came to the farm as a teenager. And the deal was that he and his brother were to work on the farm where I live for 10 years to earn their father's freedom. And their father was enslaved. This was in the 1850s. His father was enslaved at a neighboring farm. Okay, now, what was curious to me was my own perception, because I have a PhD, and I assumed wrongly that I was the first person that worked on Dow Farm that went on to earn a PhD. I was a little puffy about that. You know, that's pretty cool. But I was not. Okay, there was this young man whose circumstances were a whole lot harder than mine, who went on to get a PhD. After he and his brother served their 10 years, they bought their father's freedom. The family moved to Baltimore. They tapped into Sharp Street Church, which later morphed into Morgan State University, and was educated there. He later went on to earn a PhD, and what was even more phenomenal was that he started the N.C. Carroll Home for the Aged, which was a retirement place for the people coming out of slavery that had nowhere to go as old people. I mean, isn't that phenomenal? You know, so anyway, the model for this was someone of my friend Vaughn knew, and he did a phenomenal job of channeling Nathaniel Carroll. I talked to him about the story, and I said, I need to put you in this mode. And I had the idea, as soon as I heard that this had happened at the farm where I walked, this guy also walked, okay, in the fields. Where I worked the fields when I was younger, this is also where this young man worked the fields. And to me, that was just a powerful experience. So I wanted to do a painting where I'm saying, I see you. I see what you did. And so I had the idea immediately of me holding one end of a tobacco stick and him holding the other. And while you're here today, if you want to learn any more about the tobacco raising process, there are a few people in this room who know about it, and I would like you to raise your hand. Come on, I need Brenda, I need Sharon, I need those people back there. Ron, where's Ron? Look at the people that are raising their hand. Franklin Robinson. Okay, all of those people know how to raise tobacco. All right, they know that it is an incredibly labor-intensive process, and that it is, I mean, it's downright scary. Some of the people working in the barns, they were like acrobats swinging up and down the barns, the tire poles. And it's such a labor-intensive thing from sunup to sundown. You have tobacco gum all over you. And these people, Terry Robinson, raise your hand. Did you raise your hand? Okay, you need to raise your hand. You know, he's one of them swinging down from the tire poles. You know, there's quite a story about how this whole process worked. It was very, very labor-intensive and very, very, very hard, messy work. And we all did it, and we all loved it. Was that right? We loved it enough. We're glad we don't do it today. We loved it then, right? Loved it then. Anyway, so that's what this piece is about. And in a lot of my pieces, I show the universe, and that's kind of in the background of this one. The Frederick connection to this one is the red dress. Okay, and I don't know if she's here. Is Joni Jenkins here yet?
Yes.
Where are you? Is she here? Where are you? Come in here. Come in here. Yay, there she is. She's the designer of the red dress, okay? And this isn't the first dress she's made for me for a painting, but, you know, I really appreciate it. She's hosting the after party up in her place, up at 124, right up the street. So if anybody wants to come up there, that's her thing. So anyway, so that's the Frederick connection to this piece. And then this is the last piece I'm going to talk about. They all have backstories, and we can chat in the other room. But this piece is called Tea Time. This is my front porch. This is a little bit of the backstory behind this was when COVID hit. It has to do with tear and skip. Okay, when COVID hit, kids were sort of confined. You know, everybody was confined, and so we decided that we needed to have a Halloween party. So she would have something that was exciting to do. So that Halloween party was probably about 4 years ago. It was quite a while ago, and my friend Skip came dressed with this wolf mask. And I remember how excited she was that this was happening. We had a Halloween party outside. We had a fire pit. We're roasting hot dogs, marshmallows. It's dark. We have lights. We're playing hide and seek in the dark. It's fun time. And he shows up with this mask on. And I'll never forget her response to that. It was so cool. And then I got to thinking about how interesting it would be to have somebody like that for tea, because I know a lot about tea time because of my friend Ronnie Nehemias. Ronnie, raise your hand again. It's Ronnie Nehemias. Okay, her mom was originally from England, and her mom, she considered me almost an adopted daughter at one point. I mean, she was really kind to me, and she started a teacup collection for me. That's her teacups. And she also taught me how to make shortbread. So I made shortbread to paint in the picture. Skip, you didn't get that because we didn't have that out when we had you pose. But I made the shortbread, and shortbread really isn't, and Ronnie knows this, it's really not this color, okay? It's a very pale color. So, but I had to make the shortbread darker because it had to match the dark in the woof. Okay, so there's that. And so anyway, and then the lace tablecloth, I think that came from Mrs. Hardesty's house a long time ago. Where's Sally Ann? Sally Ann, I think that's your mom's tablecloth. Yeah. And anyway, so part of me was like, throw a white sheet on that table. It'd be easier to paint. And then I had to figure out, no matter how long you have been painting, I have been painting, there are things that I have to paint that I've never painted before. So how do I do a translucent lace tablecloth? Okay, we'll figure it out. So a month later, maybe more, we had a translucent lace tablecloth. And I also, on the actual floor of the porch does not have what looks like sprinkles on it. When you look at the piece, it looks like it has sprinkles on the floor, and that's because I wanted it to go with the tea party kind of atmosphere. And also, the universe appears in this one too. And I like to throw the universe things in there because it's like, we're just a small speck. And I remember one day in Woodsboro, I'm driving home when I taught at Linganore High School. I'm driving home from Linganore High School, and a school bus is in front of me, and they're letting children off. And I'm going, my God, we're hurling through space, and they're letting children off a school bus. It's like, it's like what? So I have put the universe in a lot of my pieces just because of, that kind of thinking that we are, he's sitting here having tea and we're hurling through space right now as we speak. So anyway, but anyway, that's what I wanted to share for right now. Anyway, and I want you to, enjoy the work and ask if you have any questions, anything about any other backstories or whatever. Anyway, and I'm just so grateful for this center and for all the people that are out there that have made a huge difference in my life. I really, and made this happen, because it took a lot of people to make art shows happen. And I hope that reading the gratitude list helps people who are not artists understand how important you are to the creative people in your life. Okay? That's it.